I want to go a little long here up top, if you don't mind, to connect some disturbing pieces of something that I think is, frankly, over the top. Because I really don't know what hellish fate we face tomorrow when all these sequestration cuts kick in. What I do know is that for the administration that has been terrifying us, well, the wheels have already come off. The folks behind Mr. Cool acting a tad bit creepy. An email from a guy named Sperling that I tell you will leave you hurling. White House economic advisor Gene Sperling clearly threatening one of the most celebrated journalists in Washington, apparently because Bob Woodward wasn't towing the administration line in Washington. Sperling blasting Woodward for reporting the president was changing the entire sequestration debate by essentially moving the goalposts and suddenly demanding revenues, i.e. taxes, when all sides had long ago agreed, including the president, it'd only be about the size of the spending cuts. Now, I want you to focus on that portion of Sperling's email to Woodward that gets really creepy. I know you may not believe this, but as a friend, I think you will regret staking out that claim. Dun, dun, dun. You will regret staking out that claim. What? Was that Sperling pulling a soprano?
You remember one thing, this you better hear. You want to talk all this old school about the rules? Well, here's a rule you might remember. I'm the one who calls the shots. And you better pay me the respect that I gave your brother, or we're going to have a problem.
Now, imagine putting that in the form of an email. But could you imagine if that were coming from a Bush White House official? Well, quite rightly, the media would be all over it. And the guy writing it would all but be in prison for dare even thinking about it. But no one is asking for Gene to just pack up. Maybe because they don't want to risk this White House's wrath. They know this White House's history, and they know what happened to Standard & Poor's, the only credit ratings agency to downgrade this country's AAA rating. They remember what oddly happened after that. The Justice Department suing S&P for inflating the ratings of all those subprime mortgages that eventually went bad. Now, never mind, other ratings agencies did the same exact thing. Could it be S&P got fingered because it was the only one to dare downgrade the U.S.? Then there's Douglas Elmendorf, the director of the Congressional Budget Office, who was called into the White House shortly after dare questioning the administration's so-called savings from its proposed health care law. Now, after a little chat with the president of the Oval Office, different numbers, more friendly to the president's health care law, coming from the Congressional Budget Office. And remember those GM bondholders who were complaining about the auto bailout years back when they weren't buying the White House line? Well, guess who the White House moved to the back of the line? Yep, GM bondholders. Now, I could go on about how just weeks after the inauguration, the president threatened mayors who received stimulus money that he would call them out if they did not spend that money as he saw fit, or how he publicly berated the Supreme Court during his 2010 State of the Union address over a ruling he didn't like, or threatened the court yet again, suggesting its legitimacy would erode if it ruled against the health care law that he very much did like. Follow the crumbs. Frankly, it gets crummier. And I have lots more crumbs. But why risk being called a racist? Because that is another popular attack line with this White House. I said it before, I'll say it again. My problem isn't with the color of the president's skin, but with the thickness of that skin. A president who takes great joy saying, for example, that he doesn't watch Fox News, but seems disproportionately obsessed by Fox News.
Uncle Jim, who's a little stubborn and been watching Fox News and...
Anyway, a president who acts cool, but clearly remembers every slight. Now, I'm not saying the president has to directly threaten folks himself. That's gauche. He doesn't have to. He has people to do that and email that to Mark Levin, who's had enough of that. It's incredible, Mark. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, Neil, he's threatening the American people all the time, too. What do I make of this? I make of this that we have an imperial president, that he doesn't ever want to debate his opposition truthfully about his record or the facts. He's always demonizing, creating straw men. And this is what you do when you're a very, very powerful president of the United States. And basically, he thinks when he was reelected that whatever he decides to do is the mandate the American people gave him. But even more than his threats against Woodward, and that's what they were, and this has to be the tip of the iceberg. There must be all kinds of sleazy activity into what you've mentioned here. He's threatening the American people. That's what this sequester is all about. Every time we come to a continuing resolution, that's what it's all about. When we come to a debt ceiling, that's what it's all about. The man has never come forward with a positive idea on how to resolve some of our horrific spending problems and taxing problems and borrowing and printing problems. What he does is he seeks to smear and crush his opponents if he can't buy them off, and then tell the American people, look at them over there, they're trying to destroy you. And then he goes through this list of horribles. Let me tell you something. How many reports have we heard from the news media that over 80% of the federal budget is exempt from the sequester? Over 80%. How many times have we heard the media say we're talking about $85 billion this year when the Congressional Budget Office said it's $44 billion this year? How many times have the media reported that we're talking about $22 billion when it comes to domestic spending? Not even $44 billion. And we have a pretty brand new Government Accountability Office report that tells us every single year there's an excess of $125 billion in waste and fraud in the federal government. And we have another GAO report that tells us there's hundreds of billions of dollars in savings.
But here's what I think what happened this week in the whole Bob Woodward thing was a seminal development in this respect. It's almost as if the boat started leaking, because it's one thing to say, oh, that's just Levin yapping about that. That's just Fox yapping about that. But this is someone like Bob Woodward who said, look, I remember what the sequestration arrangement was and what it would involve when we would revisit the issue, that there would be no talk of revenues, that it would just be a discussion of cuts, and the only debate would be the degree of those cuts and how far they go and what would be cut. Now, you know, he's called on that. That is Woodward. Wait a minute. We got that all wrong. And then what clearly is a very threatening email. Not too bright to put it in an email, but having said that, it sort of exposed an underbelly of something I've been telling people is there. They should be aware of, whether it's the president directly, whether it's others involved. The facts of the matter there's sort of like a wink and a nod understanding that if you dare question us, you will be screwed.
Yeah, there's no question. Look how the man, you know, let's step back a second and put this in some context. When Obama ran for the Senate, he was smiling, waving his hands. What were his thugs doing behind the scenes? They were doing everything they could to get a hold of his opponent's divorce records, which were under seal in California. They came out. They embarrassed the family, won, and Obama didn't know anything about it. Look at this last campaign against Romney. Romney, who in my view was an inept candidate, but that aside, look at the brutality of these ads about him wanting somebody's wife to pass away because of his own policies and on, just personal vicious attacks. Obama always pretended he was above it, smiling, waving his hands, you know. They do.
Well, Mark, what do you make of the notion, and this happens in a lot of administrations where they say, well, the president doesn't know anything about it. Each administration has its hitmen. Richard Nixon had Ehrlichman and Haldeman. You can argue that Bush administration had Dick Cheney, and that everyone is saying, well, you know, this president's above that sort of thing. He doesn't do that sort of thing. I always come back and say, I think, yeah, whatever you argue about a nice guy and all of that, and he's a very amiable sort, wonderful family. But the fact of the matter is, and I've seen this as well as this number of Fox News, that look, for a guy who says he doesn't watch Fox News, doesn't like Fox News, the chatter, the mindlessness or whatever on Fox News, he knows and remembers, or his staff conveys to him, every little critical story that pops up on Fox News. So my only point in saying all of this is there's a disconnect between your surface cool and your sort of under the surface not so.
Because he's not a nice guy. That's the truth. He's not a nice guy. Republicans and consultants and candidates keep saying he's a nice guy, he's just over his head. He's not a nice guy, and he's over his head, and he's an ideologue. And what bothers me is you can talk about Woodward, which is appalling what was done to him. But what bothers me is this public trust he has with the American people. He's abusing it. He's lying to us constantly. He is not a nice guy. For instance, he could fire Sperling today. He'll never fire Sperling today. He just got his man Hagel through. Hagel's not a nice guy, a very nasty guy. He's now heading the Defense Department. He's surrounded by nasty people who lie to us all the time. That's the truth. And what Woodward did, and you're right, because of his past reporting, he helped bring the veil down ever so slightly, and now we're going to see what the rest of the media does. As I said on my show last night, seems to be about 80-10 defending the White House, 80 defending
that's right.
about 10%
That's right.
defending war, another 10% who are
Okay.
probably drunk.
Well, I don't know about the drunk thing. But Mark